Hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of At the Table. I'm always so grateful that you're giving your time and energy and just part of your day to be able to sit in on some of these conversations. And today I think is going to be really helpful, not only for moms and children's ministry leaders, but really for everyone in the church, because we've all got children. We've all got the next generation kind of in our lives, whether they're neighbors or nieces, nephews. And so I am really happy and excited to invite my friend Virginia Brennan onto the show to talk to us all things Next Gen Ministry. So Virginia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right. So you are super qualified. You have so much wisdom that I am really excited to tap into. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your leadership journey? Where are you recording from? Tell us a little bit about you and your family.
Yeah, absolutely. I am in the Florida Panhandle. I'm originally from Arkansas, Northeast Arkansas in Jonesboro. I was saved at the age of 9 at Vacation Bible School. VBS is super close to my heart. I went to college in my hometown at Arkansas State. I was super involved in my home church, loved it, loved serving in Awana at my church, loved our BCM, our Baptist Collegiate Ministry. Really wasn't sure what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I thought I was going to go to law school, but
Nice.
the Lord, the Lord, it was actually at an event at our BCM. One local woman who is a local children's minister was sharing her testimony of feeling called into ministry as a college student, and she just wasn't sure what that was going to look like for her as a woman. And sitting there listening to her speak, it was like a bolt of lightning. I thought, oh, I think this is what God's doing in my life. And so I ended up going to seminary. I went to seminary at Mid-America in Memphis. While I was there, I had 2 separate professors say, hey, you should consider, going on. You should think about getting a doctorate. And so I ended up going straight into that at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in Wake Forest, North Carolina. So I served in higher education administration for a little while, but I've been in children's ministry for the past 7 years, which really is my heart and my love and really what I love to do. So yeah, that's a little about me. And I'm married. My husband and I have twin preschoolers. So they keep us busy, but they're a lot of fun.
Yeah. So not only like the pedigrees and degrees and training for it, but then you're also just in the thick of raising two preschoolers, which is always fun, right?
Yes.
I also appreciate you sharing just your journey to like leadership and next steps, because it's always so interesting, I think, to hear how women like reluctantly or kind of hesitantly, it's like, I don't know what this is going to look like, but then to also God just opens up doors to those simple yeses. So thank you so much just for sharing kind of what brought you to today. So we are talking all things children's ministry as we are looking at the calling of Eve and just women in leadership in the church and how they use their gifts for the church. And I think this is a really big conversation because prayerfully, like we all have children in our churches, and we are needing to be intentional about raising up this younger generation. I don't want to say next generation, but we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So why don't you kind of dig us into and just start off the conversation with, why do we need children's ministry? And what are some of the things like the staples or the pillars that are really important whenever we're looking at discipling our children in our churches? So just kind of give us maybe the broad overview, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty here in a bit.
Right. And so, children's ministry is vital in a lot of ways. One, to give children an opportunity to be taught. We talk a lot about this at their developmental level. And so to be taught in a way that is going to reach them most effectively. I think children's ministry is a great part of a bigger picture of helping parents and coming alongside parents as they equip and disciple their children. Because it's, some parents have had the wonderful opportunity of growing up in a Christian home and seeing that modeled, but certainly a lot of families in our churches haven't. And so having someone come alongside them and help them and equip them in discipling and teaching their children is super valuable. And so I think, it's a multi-pronged approach of, yes, we want to have quality, and age-appropriate ministries for our children, but then we also want to come alongside and equip parents as well.
So can you maybe kind of peel back the curtain a little bit and tell us, like, what does that look like? So how do you come alongside parents? And I would imagine, just as you're talking, I'm thinking through, you've got parents that probably have a pretty consistent view or like an idea of what their home devotionals are going to look like, those kind of things. And then you've got parents on the other side of the spectrum that are like, yeah, that's the church's job. Like, I bring you to church and the church is going to disciple them. So let's go ahead and get into a little bit of the nitty gritty of how do you walk alongside both sets of parents with different expectations? How do you do that well?
Right. Well, and I think for one thing, it's definitely a whole church effort in that the children's ministry and the adult ministries of the church want to be partnering together in this. I think for parents, encouraging them to be a part of a small group, for their age group, being in a Sunday school class or a small group, whatever you want to call those. So learning alongside other adults in their phase of life as part of the adult ministry. But then also as a children's minister, there are different ways that I can come alongside parents. One is at major milestones in the lives of children and families. So one example is we do baby dedication twice a year at our church. We have a meeting for parents the week before, where we take about an hour and a half to not only talk about what it is and isn't, but then also equip parents and kind of try to give them a vision and gives them some practical tools about discipling their children in their house. Another good milestone is whenever kids are moving from kind of one set of age graded ministry to another. So going from preschool into the children's ministry or the children's ministry into the student ministry, being strategic and intentional about facilitating smooth transitions for kids and for families. That's an opportunity to also reach out to parents and be like, hey, here are some tools for this next phase of development in the life of your child that you can use to disciple them, to equip them. And then, of course, at salvation and baptism, giving parents tools to disciple their children, once they make a commitment for Christ. One of my favorite things that I love is the I'm a Christian Now books from Lifeway. They have an older guide and a younger guide. And in those guides, they have, questions and guidance for parents to work through that with their children. And so there are all sorts of milestones where we can reach out to parents. And then also one of the things that I like to do is I like to once or twice a year during our adult discipleship class time, which is on Wednesday nights for us, I like to teach adult discipleship classes about, ministering to kids, teaching kids the Bible. I try to keep those very broad to where both parents and volunteers can attend those classes to learn and be equipped to reach and minister to children. So those are some of the things I like to do. Yeah.
I love that. Thanks for helping us out, because I think those are really practical things. And you're kind of hitting on something that I know I hear as I lead women and moms and, just even different volunteers, to where I think so much of the struggle with children's ministry is that you've either got people scared because they don't know how to do it, or they also are raising little people, they're raising their own children and they're like, that's not my job. And so I think that there's a lot of struggle just within the framework of getting people involved, getting people to actually own, hey, this is not only your kids, but this is a church family. And we are getting to work together as they're journeying toward Jesus, as they are taking steps toward Jesus, which is going to look very different. And I love your different milestones and different seasons. So let's kind of maybe talk through what are some of the hard things or frustrations. I'm trying to think of how to phrase it in a positive light, but I do think that there are just a lot of things that kind of maybe get dumped on next gen ministry that makes it a little bit more unique and distinct in the struggle. So can you maybe kind of talk through just what are some of the things where you're like, oh, all right, Jesus, I know you were going to work this out. What are some of the hardships that I think you're kind of seeing and facing?
Right. I think definitely probably the biggest, most universal one is always recruiting and always needing volunteers. and then just communication. I feel like that's another, trying to communicate adequately with families, but then also with your volunteers, and, casting a vision to your volunteers. And so, getting the right people on the bus, communicating to your volunteers and your families. I think those are some big ones. And then, there are always just different things. And I feel like this one's probably universal in every church, but I saw a conversation about this recently, just getting discouraged, and just continuing on in faithfulness, even whenever, those people who never have anything nice to say and who only have complaints are coming, and just, staying the course through that. And so, I think there may be some things that are unique to Next Gen Ministries, but then there are some things that are just universal that we all kind of have to sort our way through. So,
yeah, I feel like that could be a whole other podcast episode for another day that we can have you on for, and just fighting through discouragement. So talking about volunteers, because I do think that's a big key element, because especially children, like, you're wanting to make sure that you have enough, you're wanting to make sure that you've got diversity in those age groups and those kind of things. So what does it look like for you for volunteer recruitment? Like, how are you recruiting? How are you training? What does that process look like for you?
Right. And so one of the things that I just try to encourage, especially with other children's ministry leaders, is that you have to develop a mindset of ongoing recruitment. Recruitment is not typically something that you do once a year or twice a year and it's done. In a moderately or large size church, especially, recruitment is always ongoing. And so, for me, I personally probably recruit 6 to 12 new volunteers a month, which is, I don't know, a lot of people, I guess.
Yeah.
But there's sort of, and let me even back up a little bit. So other people may hear that and be like, that's insane. One of the ways that I try to set up my ministry is I try to put key leaders in place to be able to run and, manage the ministries on an ongoing, like, on a week-to-week basis, I guess is the best way to say that. Because I always want my ministries to be in a position where if something happened to me and I disappeared, like, Sunday wouldn't fall apart. It would still go on. Everything would be okay. My volunteers know what to do. So that then gives me the ability to be in other places at strategic times. And so, like, whenever I'm thinking ahead to recruitment, for example, I like to be in our worship service once or twice a month. Not only just for my own personal benefit, that I think it's always interesting to me that in children's ministry, it's okay for, like, the children's minister to never, ever attend the worship service.
Yep.
That's not okay for any other church member, but it's okay for the children's minister.
Yep. That you say
so,
that. So thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So, one, for my own personal, like, spiritual health, I do like to be in the worship service once or twice a month, but then also strategically placing myself there so that, I can be seen by the congregation, so that people who don't necessarily have children in my ministry, they can still, know and figure out who I am, so that I can kind of look around and get an idea of who's in the church, who's joined, who's new. We have once a quarter, like, a new members luncheon and class. We do provide childcare for that, and I oversee that, but I always make sure that I am in that luncheon and class, so that, again, I'm meeting our new members, I'm talking to them, I'm getting to know them. So I want to have leadership in place so that I can be in strategic places to start developing relationships and identifying new volunteers. And then I like to have one-on-one conversations with people. I like to do it in person, ideally, but over the phone, just to try to get an idea of, what people's interests are, what their experiences are, what their backgrounds are, and try to place them in an area that's a good fit. Because if we can place people well from the beginning, we're more likely to retain them, because they enjoy what they're doing and they're comfortable in what they're doing. And so I like to try to have routine trainings. I mentioned the classes already, but then kind of one-off training events, probably 2 or 3 times a year, to try to get everybody together and get everyone on the same page. So I try to be strategic in leadership development. That way I can also be strategic in, being places to put myself in the path of new volunteers and get to know these people. So it kind of is this web that all works together.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's, I think, really helpful. And it also makes me think the way that you were talking about, how you're training, the one-offs, and then even the midweek, trainings and those kind of things. I think one of the things, and even before we started recording, we were kind of talking about this, that is really kind of culminating in our culture and in just the current climate that church is right now, is just the safety of kids, because there is so much that's coming out with abuse and parents being fearful of, okay, who's going to be working with my children, and we want the church to be a safe place. We want it to be the safest place, to where they're able to come and grow and be vulnerable, not only for our children, but everyone that comes on our campuses, right? So can you maybe kind of hit on even just the need and the shift of parents really kind of coming in maybe with a skepticism, or even worse, like a distrust of the church and who's going to be pouring into their kids? Like, how do you combat that? How do you communicate that well? How do you set up your volunteers well? Like, what are you doing, I think, in that space to really kind of prep, train, prepare, and then even communicate to the community and to those that are on church campus, like, hey, we love you and this is a safe place for your kids?
Absolutely. Well, definitely having strong safety and security policies and procedures is an absolute must in today's world. And so background checks, but we can't stop there. Churches absolutely have to be doing background checks on volunteers. A application process where you are gathering information from potential volunteers. That's a great place to ask for their testimony, ask, where they have served in the past, and get that kind of information. Also getting references for potential volunteers and checking those references. And so having an application process for volunteers is very helpful. And of course, training. One place that I always encourage churches to check with your church's liability insurance company. They oftentimes have outright requirements for things that churches should be doing that we may not always be doing, including background checks. They oftentimes have resources as well that they can provide for their churches. One great one, there are numerous companies who do this and provide this, but Ministry Safe is one example of a company that has a great online training. So like, for example, all of our volunteers complete their Ministry Safe training, which is a child protection training program, so that all of our volunteers are trained in spotting signs of abuse, but also characteristics of abusers and child predators, so that all of our people are trained to know and identify these characteristics, but definitely ongoing training as well. We have brought in local guest speakers to share with us about child protection and child safety. There are other training programs for that. And so I think having multiple policies in place, always having two or more unrelated adults in the room, windows in the doors. So having a comprehensive policy and procedure is the best way to protect our churches and to protect our children.
That's all so good. And I'm wondering, so how do you communicate that to your visitors and to people that are coming in? Is it you're waiting for them to ask? You're like, how do you let people that are a part of your church and that are visiting your church know, like, hey, we're taking this seriously? Is it more in individual conversations, or are you like posting it, sending out letters? What does that look like?
I would say in our case, it's not something that we are like posting or sending out letters. Not that you can't. Right. For us, it's more so just inherent, I think, in the process. I mean, we also have a check-in process and a checkout process. We have security people, on our church campus and in our ministry. And so as we recruit no volunteers, they go through this process. And so for us, it's just sort of in the DNA of the ministry. And so certainly if a first time guest, had questions, we would gladly explain it. But as far as proclaiming it in any sort of way, we don't. What is interesting, one thing that I think is fairly new is that churches can also get accreditation in their safety and security policies for their preschool, children's, and youth ministries. And so that demonstrates that your church is also meeting outside standards and best practices in your safety, security, and children's ministry. So
love that. And I didn't know that. So that's really cool. I think that's something that I'll have to see about for our church. But I think it's really good that you're kind of highlighting these things, because I know even in the turn in the climate of church and what we're walking through, like I've had moms ask like, okay, so what does the process look like? So I think having that structure and that system is something that you're able to point to and say, well, hey, this is everything that we do. But then also thinking through like your check-in and check-out system and all of that. If there's a parent that asks to volunteer, they're all going through the same structure. They're all going through the same steps in order to be able to serve alongside those kids. And so I think it's really important. And I really appreciate you just giving some practical tools and steps to be thinking about, and to even be looking toward different resources on, all right, how do we make sure that this is something that our kids know we are for them and we love them, and to their families, they're safe while they're here. So such an important conversation. And I appreciate just the wisdom you're giving into that. Okay. So as we wrap up, because this is going quickly, as always, I think one of the things that I really kind of want to pick your brain about before we get off is, I think I don't know where we picked this up. Maybe it's just me. But we look at children's ministry either as a kind of glorified babysitting, like this is where the kids are going to go while the adults do all the heavy lifting and theology. Or we think of it in terms of, well, we're training you to do ministry when you get big, when you get older. And the reality is, our kids are doing amazing, incredible things right now in elementary schools and junior highs and middle schools and high school. And so talk to me a little bit about how we kind of shift as adults, as the big people, right? Like, how do we shift our mindset into thinking, you know what, we're not preparing them for like a future, commissioning, but that they are doing and working and evangelizing and, bringing their friends to church. Like they're oftentimes teaching me about our big God. So can you maybe kind of at the end of this, like just share a little bit about how do we shift our mindset into, this isn't a temporary training ground, but this is something that they are actively putting into work right now in the everyday.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and one thing that first comes to mind too is that with children's ministry, we know that the majority of professions of faith and decisions that we see do happen in childhood, even before the teen years. And we know that a lot of, our worldview is formed in childhood. And so we know that those years are just so formative and so foundational for the rest of life. And so we run a real danger in thinking about children's ministry as, babysitting, because it's not, we can't waste those years. We've got to capitalize on them and invest in our kids and lay a foundation in their lives. But also one story that comes to mind, and so this is actually a story that came from an adult. This was our last staff meeting before VBS. We were talking about just the impact of Vacation Bible School, which obviously, for me, I was saved there. So I love VBS. And one of the ladies, our ladies who's the head of our housekeeping, she's like our head of our custodial staff. She shared her own testimony of her daughter when her daughter was young. They were driving around town, and she was asking about different buildings that they were seeing. And she, her mom would be like, okay, well, that's a bank. Oh, well, that's a Methodist church. Okay, that's a school. That's a Baptist church. And her daughter asked her, Mom, well, which one's our church? Because they didn't go to church anywhere. Mm-hmm. And then a few weeks later, her daughter was invited to Vacation Bible School. And she thought, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and let her go. And after that, her daughter didn't get saved at that VBS, but she came home saying, Mom, I want to go back to my church. I want to go back to my church.
Mhm.
And so that, her persistence in that led her whole family then to return to that church and begin attending that church. Her mom got saved, her daughter eventually got saved. And so, this is from a child who just came to Vacation Bible School once, and that was her only exposure to church.
Mhm.
And that ultimately led her family to Christ. And so, and this woman is sharing this with us in our church staff meeting, that it was her daughter's persistent desire to go back to her church after 1 week of VBS that led an entire family to Christ, which is awesome.
Oh, I love that so much. And that testimony is similar even to Josh, my husband, like to where the kids went into church, like for school and those kind of things. And then the whole family ended up coming and getting saved. And so I do think there is just so much beauty, even in a child, and their truth and their longing and their curiosity that I think sometimes we really kind of discredit or even just don't even think about because we're so busy and consumed with other things, sometimes, a lot of times, menial things. And so I love just the heart of a child and the consistency and the ability, I think, to see God as a big creator God, and their curiosity then leads us to kind of slow down and be thinking like, you know what, like I haven't thought of that in years, or I've never even asked that question. And so being able to journey alongside them, I think really helps me in my own walk with the Lord. And how oftentimes my kids say something and the Holy Spirit uses that to really kind of prick my heart, right? And so they're little preachers, they're little evangelists and little, I don't know, there's just so much that I think we tend to really kind of gloss over that I hope even in listening to this episode, we kind of take a pause a bit and be thankful just for how God is using our children in our lives and in our communities. So Virginia, I am so grateful for you. I'm grateful just for all of your wisdom. Why don't you tell our listeners, how do they connect with you? How do they continue to learn from you? I think you started a podcast on children's ministry. So why don't you tell us all the things that you're doing and how we connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So about a year ago, another friend and colleague and I started a podcast about children's ministry. It's KidMin with Dr. Val and Dr. Virginia. We love children's ministry and just love helping and equipping other people. We want to be good stewards of the knowledge and wisdom and mentorship that's invested in us and then be able to share that. So yeah, KidMin with Dr. Val and Dr. Virginia. We're also on Instagram. We're on Pinterest as KidMin Doctor. So yeah, absolutely. Go check us out.
Love it. I'll make sure to get all of those links and put those in the show notes, but you definitely want to make sure that you connect with Virginia and Dr. Val and learn from them and help to make this place, make your churches, make your homes, make your communities a place to where you are seeing God work in the lives of your children and of you and your gifts. So thank you so much, Virginia, for joining us. And I hope you will join us next week for another episode of At the Table. We'll see you then.